Hi everybody, thank you for joining us today. I'm your host Kevin Eckberg and you're watching Window on the World. We are joined today by Interim Director for International Studies, Dr. Bill Fischer. Dr. Fischer, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
How are you today?
I'm really good, thank you.
Great. So are you originally from the Joplin area?
No, I'm not. I'm originally from Michigan. I grew up in Michigan, and then after graduating high school, I went to a different state for college. I went to Minnesota. And then I've kind of been around a lot of places since then. But I moved here to Joplin in 2015.
Oh, what brought you here?
The job at Missouri Southern. So I'm a associate professor of history in the social sciences department. And I've been doing that since 2015. And I took over in the interim as interim director of international studies this semester. So just a few weeks ago.
Okay, well, how's it been filling in for Dr. Stebbins?
It's been really good. Dr. Stebbins left behind a real legacy, a lot of international programs and partnerships, and I'm learning new things about them every day. It's been a challenge, but it's been a rewarding challenge.
Great. Well, as someone whose job it is to encourage others to see the world, it probably helps if you have traveled yourself. Mm-hmm. So could you tell us about your experiences abroad?
Sure, absolutely. I traveled abroad a couple times sort of in my youth with my family, but I really started to spend time abroad more kind of at the end of college and after. So one of the first things I did that was long-term as an academic program is I did a study abroad program right after graduating from college in which I participated in an archaeological field school in Rome, Italy. Wow. For about 2 months or so. So that was very fun. And then after that, when I was an undergrad, I had studied history and also Spanish. But I had never been to a Spanish-speaking country. Well, I had traveled to Spain very briefly, but I had never really gotten a chance to use Spanish in depth. So I really wanted to find some kind of opportunity to travel to Latin America, a volunteer opportunity or something like that. And I ended up going in 2006 to Ecuador. Nice. And I spent about 11 months in Ecuador from 2006 to 2007 as an English teacher, a volunteer English teacher. And I lived with the host family, and I got to travel around the country of Ecuador a lot, and I really fell in love with the place. And so then during that year, I applied for graduate school in history, specifically Latin American history, so that I could continue to study both Ecuador and Latin America more broadly. And so while I was in graduate school, which was 9 years of my life, or so, 8 or 9 years of my life, I went back to Ecuador on several different occasions, including for another year-long stint where I did most of my research for my PhD. And I've traveled to different parts of Latin America since then, both for vacation and also leading study abroad programs here at MSSU.
What places did you go to?
So in 2017, I led a study abroad program to Cuba, and then in 2019 to Mexico, just Mexico City, and then just this past year in 2024 to Costa Rica.
You mentioned Cuba as one of the destinations. How was that like?
Cuba was a really fascinating place. The restrictions on travel for United States citizens were such that we had to go as part of a tour. In other words, there was a tour agency and a local Cuban guide that had to kind of take us around the country. We weren't really free to build the itinerary ourselves. But I had a really great experience there. All of the people that we met and spoke to were really, really great. And what most struck me about Cuba is that it is very, very dependent on tourism. Sure. There are so many tourists in Cuba, particularly in certain places, that it's kind of the most tourist-dense place I've ever been. And that's because the Cuban economy really depends on tourism to an incredible degree. And so when you go, you're going to see a lot of tourists. Americans, but a lot of tourists from Europe and Canada and other places as well.
I've mentioned to you in the past that my family is from Ecuador.
Yes.
So could you tell us more about your time in Ecuador?
Absolutely, I'd love to.
Where did you stay?
So the first time I went to Ecuador in 2006, I lived in a city called Ambato, which is a city of a few 100,000 people, pretty much right in the center of the country. And I lived with a family there, and they were excellent. I mean, I remain friends with them to this day. But I also traveled around the country. And one of the things about Ecuador, which is truly fascinating, is it's a relatively small country. It's approximately the size of the state of Nevada.
Right.
But because it's located on the equator and because it has a massive mountain chain running through the center of it, there's a huge amount of diversity in terms of the climate, in terms of the ecology. So the country is pretty starkly divided between the Pacific coast, the Andean Sierra, or the mountains in the center, and the Amazonian region in the east. And what's really cool is you can visit all three of those regions in a single day because the country is relatively small. So it is entirely possible for you to wake up in the Amazon rainforest, eat lunch above the tree line at something like 3,000 or 4,000 meters above sea level, and then get to the coast in time to see the sunset over the Pacific Ocean.
Right.
So it's a really fascinating place for that region.
And you got to see it all then?
I got to see it all. The one part of Ecuador I really haven't been to is the Galapagos Islands. Okay. The Galapagos Islands are Ecuadorian territory, but I never went there. I would like to someday.
Sure. It's actually where my parents met, in the Galapagos
Oh,
Islands.
really? Wow, that's great. Yeah, it's a fascinating place. But what I understand is to really see the Galapagos Islands, it helps to be able to chart, to be a part of a tour boat. It's not some place that you can really move around. You can't really visit all of the islands on your own. You have to be part of a tour, and I've just never done that.
What did you think of the food?
I really like the food. It kind of depends. I guess what I would say is, I think that some of the Ecuadorian dishes for special occasions are great, but sometimes the food that people typically eat day to day is not always the most fascinating. It's a lot of rice and beans, which is good. It's not bad, but some of the special occasion dishes that I really like. For example, there's a dish called yapingachos, which are potato cakes that are filled with cheese and oil and usually eaten with sausage and egg and avocado. I think it's delicious. There are some soups that I really like. For example, there's a fish soup called encebollado, which is delicious. Ecuadorians like ceviche, and they have a very strong rivalry with Peru over who makes the best ceviche.
Yeah, and who invented it.
Yeah, and who invented it. Peruvians eat a more simplified ceviche, and Ecuadorians eat a more elaborate ceviche with different ingredients in it. But I really like some of that food.
Sure. Some of the Indians eat cuy,
Yes.
which is guinea pig.
Yes.
Did you ever try that?
I did. I've had guinea pig on a couple occasions. It's not my favorite.
Okay.
It's a lot of work for not very much meat because it's little tiny bones and little tiny bits of meat. So that wasn't a highlight for me. But I've got I never grew up having guinea pigs for pets, so it didn't freak me out to eat it like it might some Americans who visit Ecuador. But yeah, cuy, I can sort of take it or leave it.
Okay, great. Now, when was the last time you went back?
I haven't been to Ecuador since 2017. And I would really like to go back again soon. I miss it very much. It's kind of like a second home to me.
Sure.
So I hope to be able to go back soon. But the last time I was there was in 2017. And that was just for pleasure. That was just a trip that I took with my wife. She had never been. And it was a really special trip to get to do. And then a couple years later, she and I traveled together to both Tanzania and South Africa, which are countries that she had spent a lot of time in during and after college. And so it was really great that each of us got to travel with the other to kind of the countries that are sort of our second home, that we have a lot of memories in.
Well, if you made it to Quito that last time, you might have seen me, because last time we were there was in 2017.
Oh, in 2017,
well.
yes. Our paths may have crossed, perhaps, at some point. Yeah, on that trip, we went to Quito. We also went to Baños, which is in the Oriente, or sort of halfway between the Sierra and the Oriente, or halfway between the mountains and the Amazon. And then we also went to a really wonderful place in Cotopaxi province, which is an eco-lodge called the Black Sheep Inn. I'm not getting any I'm not getting paid by the Black Sheep Inn to say this,
Right.
but if you're looking for a really amazing experience, that is an excellent lodge where you can go and do horseback riding and hikes through the high mountain valleys and that kind of stuff. So it was really cool.
So you did spend some time in the mountains too, then?
Yes, absolutely. Nice. Yeah. The city. Well, the Black Sheep Inn is close to a really small village called Chukchilan, which is quite small. But one of the things that you can visit from there is a really amazing place called the Laguna de Quilotoa, which is a lake which is located inside a collapsed volcano. Mm-hmm. So at one point in ancient history, a volcano that looked like this erupted and sort of collapsed inward, leaving a bowl that over the years filled up with water. So there's this really deep, really cold lake that you can kind of walk around the edge of. It was beautiful.
Well, it sounds beautiful.
Yeah, highly recommended.
Stay tuned. We're going to take a short break, and then we'll hear more about MSSU International Mission and Dr. Fischer's role in it. Window on the World will be right back. Welcome back to Window on the World, and if you're just joining us, we're here today with Dr. Bill Fischer, Interim Director of International Studies. We've spent some time talking about your travels abroad. Let's talk a little about your role here.
Absolutely.
So how long have you been here at the MSSU?
Since 2015 is when I started teaching here.
And what did you do before you were Interim Director?
Before I was interim director, my role was basically just teaching history classes. So my specialty is Latin American history, so I teach courses on the history of Latin America, but we're a small department, so I teach a variety of other classes too. I have taught United States history, I've taught European history, I've taught world history, and various other courses like that. In addition, I'm also the coordinator of something called History Day, which is, if you've ever heard of Science Fair, it's like Science Fair for history.
Really?
So it's a competition where middle schoolers and high schoolers from the region come to the MSSU campus and present different projects that they've done on historical research. And it's judged, and there's winners, and then there's eventually a state contest. So that's something I do every spring. And then just this past, I think November, I was asked to take over the Director of International Studies role on an interim basis. And so I started doing that as of January 1st.
You mentioned Latin America is your specialty?
Yes.
Is there a particular country you're more interested in?
So my research is about Ecuador. And so I've published articles about Ecuador, and I wrote my dissertation about Ecuador. And Ecuador always features in my classes. But when I teach Latin American history, I tend to focus on the larger countries like Brazil, Mexico, Argentina, Colombia. Although I bring up Ecuador a lot because it's a place that's near and dear to my heart, especially when I'm talking about indigenous history and the indigenous political movement in Ecuador. But I teach everything from colonial Latin America, even pre-colonial Latin America, all the way up to modern times.
Sure. Do you do antiquity as well?
Yes, I do. I teach as much about ancient civilizations like the pre-Columbian civilizations. I teach as much of that as I can, but when I'm teaching a course that has to cover all of Latin American history, I can only spend a couple weeks on those things.
And American and European history as well.
Yes. So, when I taught American history, I usually did modern American history. So I did Civil War to the present. And when I taught European history, I actually usually taught ancient European history, ancient to sort of Renaissance time period. Yeah. So yeah, when I teach Western Civ, I begin with the ancient Sumerians and get all the way up to the time of Martin Luther, which is a lot to cover in a semester, but I do it somehow.
Do you like Caesar or Pompey?
That's a good question. I think Julius Caesar had a little bit more riz, I suppose, to use a modern term.
Right. Okay. Well, do you enjoy your working here?
I do, very much, yes. I love the students and I love my colleagues.
Right. Could you discuss the college's international missions?
Absolutely. So at some point in the 90s, I want to say it was around 1995, by state law, actually, the smaller public universities in Missouri, such as Missouri Southern, Missouri Western, and others, the government of Missouri, the legislature, sort of gave each one a specialty to focus on. And Missouri Southern specialty was the international education. And so since that time, there's been an effort to have study abroad programs and other kinds of international programming. So one thing we do every fall semester, is we have the international themed semester. And so every fall, we have a variety of events throughout the semester highlighting some other country or some other region of the world. So last year, in 2024, it was Canada.
Right.
And coming up in fall of 2025, it's going to be West Africa. So that's more of a region than a single country. Right. But some of the other countries that have been done recently have been South Korea, Japan, the Nordic countries, Oceania was done not that many years ago. So it's a really cool opportunity because it brings guest speakers and other kinds of programming to campus that highlights an international country.
And you plan trips abroad too, is that right? That's
right. So I have personally planned and carried out 3 trips. But right now, I don't have a trip that I'm personally leading this year, but other MSSU faculty do. So MSSU faculty are gearing up to lead this summer a variety of trips. I'll try to remember them all. We have 2 trips going to Sweden, 2 trips going to Italy, 2 to the UK, 1 trip to France, France, Germany, and Austria, I believe. I may have that wrong. And 1 trip going to Turkey. And I believe it's the first time there's ever been an MSSU trip to Turkey. So that's very exciting.
Are there any trips planned for West Africa?
No, there was going to be a trip to Ghana in spring break, but unfortunately, there was not enough interest of students to go, so that trip's not happening.
Oh, well, that's a shame.
Yeah.
Could you tell us about the NSE and what's involved?
Yes, absolutely. So in addition to overseeing the study abroad component, I also oversee something called the National Student Exchange, which is a program that's really interesting. It allows students to effectively study not abroad, but study away. That is to say, they can enroll in a different United States or Canadian university for a semester or even 2 semesters while continuing to pay tuition to MSSU. So, for example, if you want to go study at some place like Northern Arizona University or UCLA or the University of Minnesota, what you can do is apply to National Student Exchange. You would register for credits at MSSU, but you're actually taking classes at a different university. So it's a really great opportunity if you want to check out someplace other than Joplin. If there are certain courses that another university offers that we don't, that you really want to take, you can enroll in National Student Exchange and take those courses for a semester, or even 2 semesters. So it's a really cool opportunity, and Missouri Southern is the only university in Missouri that actually participates. Really? So this is an opportunity that students at Mizzou or Missouri State don't have. So I think it's a really cool thing.
So you could study for a semester or 2 at any participating university?
Correct.
While paying the same tuition you would at MSSU?
That's correct. Yep. You can, if you want, you can choose to pay the other school's tuition rate, or you can choose to pay MSSU's tuition rate.
Right.
The reason you might choose to pay the other school's tuition instead is you're more likely to be accepted. It's more of a guarantee. That said, even those students who want to continue to pay their home university tuition, most students do get accepted to their top choice, even in that case. You would have to pay for room and board at the other school's rate. So you don't pay MSSU rate for room and board, but you would pay the other school's rate.
And I'm assuming it's a limited number of seats available.
Yes, there is, but even still, most students who want to do National Student Exchange do get accepted. There are certain eligibility requirements you have to meet. You have to be a full-time student, and you have to have gone to MSSU already for 2 complete semesters before you go. Mm-hmm. So you can't show up and then do it your very first semester here. You also have to have a GPA of 2.5 or above. But assuming you meet those requirements, you're likely to be accepted either by your top choice or one of your second or third choices.
And this is unrelated to the study abroad trips to
It
Cuba
is.
or what have you?
It's unrelated to the study abroad trips. But that said, that's kind of a good segue to talk about another exchange program that we do called ISEP, which is called the International Student Exchange. Mm-hmm. And that's similar to NSE. They're different programs, but it functions in kind of a similar way where a student can apply to ISEP, and they can study abroad at something like more than 100 different universities in about 50 different countries. And again, they pay MSSU tuition and MSSU room and board to go and study in a different university. The student will have to cover their airfare and any other incidentals they might pick up along the way, as well as some miscellaneous fees. But the Institute of International Studies here at MSSU, we have grants available for students that qualify to help cover the cost of that airfare. So these grants may cover the entire cost of the airfare or a very large portion of it. So it's an affordable way to study abroad for a whole semester.
Do you know the dollar amount of the grant?
So the grant, if you're going to study abroad for a whole semester, you can get a grant of $1,250.
Okay.
If you're going to go on one of the faculty-led MSSU study abroad programs, you can get a grant of $1,000. So it's a great way that Missouri Southern supports the idea that our students can go abroad, can broaden their horizons, and have a great international experience.
In the same vein, could you tell us about the Hansung International
Absolutely.
Summer School?
So one of the programs that's coming up very soon that is available to MSSU students is the Hansung International Summer School. So this is a school in South Korea. It's kind of in the outskirts of Seoul. I think it's closest to Incheon, if I'm not mistaken. But this is a program that up to 6 MSSU students can do. There's been a lot of students who are interested. I've been contacted by more than a dozen, and so I'll have to make a choice. I'll have to narrow it down to 6 students. But by the way it works is a student will register for 4 credits of MSSU tuition during the summer, and they will then go over to this university in South Korea, and they'll spend a month living there. They'll be put up in dorms. They'll be given a portion of the meals for that time, and they'll take a course on Korean culture, and they'll also take a Korean language course. And they'll be with students, a few other students from MSSU, but also students from all over the world, different US universities, universities in Canada, Europe as well, I believe. So it's a really cool way to go and spend a summer with people from all over the world. Speaking from personal experience, those kinds of programs are a great way to make lifelong friends. There's something about when you are in a foreign country with other people for the first time, it's like friendship goes on fast forward. You can form a deeper and a more profound connection with other people when you're in that kind of circumstance than you can if you're just kind of going through your normal daily routine.
Right,
so it's a highly recommended thing.
Because time is limited.
Exactly.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
And so that Hansung Summer School is one of the foreign universities that MSSU has a direct exchange program with. We have exchange programs with a variety of other universities as well in Japan, other universities in South Korea, some universities in France, some universities in Germany, a university in the Czech Republic. Those are direct exchange relationships that MSSU has. So if anybody would be interested in learning more about that, I can't really share all the details right now because there's just too much, but I'd be happy to talk to anybody who wants to know more about MSSU's partner universities in other countries.
You said they would enroll in 4 credit hours. Is that the minimum?
For the summer school in South Korea,
Right.
That's right.
Is that the minimum or?
That's just what it is. The summer school is designed, everybody takes the same kind of 4 credit hours.
Okay.
And so the way it works is you enroll at MSSU in 4 credit hours of this course, which is called BIEX, which means bilateral exchange. But after you complete the summer school, that's going to change to the actual courses you took. So you can apply it, in some cases students may apply it toward a gen ed, students may apply it toward an elective, but also I think that having study abroad on your transcript and on your resume is just a great way to stand out in the job market as well. It's a great way to stand out on a graduate school application. It shows that you're somebody who went above and beyond. You didn't just stay in Joplin and go through the motions for 4 years, but you sought out challenging international opportunities.
The travel grant you mentioned,
Yes.
Would students applying for a Hansung be eligible for that
They
as
would
well?
be. Yes, they would.
Wow.
Yep. So that would help cover the cost of airfare.
Is there anything I haven't asked you about that you would like to talk about?
Not really. I just think that, you know, we have a lot of different options. The study abroad programs that our own faculty lead are excellent, and they're very popular, especially because, you know, if you've got a professor on campus that you've taken a bunch of classes with and you like them and they say, hey, guess what? In the summer, we're going to go to Turkey or we're going to go to Austria, by all means, sign up for that and go with that professor. But that's not the only way that we have to study abroad. We also have these semester-length partnerships with specific universities, and we also have the ISEP program, which, as I said, has over 100 universities in over 50 different countries that students can enroll in. And then, of course, if leaving the country is a little bit too much, we've got National Student Exchange, which will allow you to go and study at a different university in the US or Canada. By the way, I didn't mention, but National Student Exchange also includes campuses in Puerto Rico and Guam and the US Virgin Islands, which are US territories. So that counts as well.
Of course. Well, Dr. Fischer, it's been great having you.
It's been great to be here. Thank you for allowing me to spread the word about these excellent programs.
Well, thank you so much for coming. That wraps it up for this edition of Window on the World. Stay tuned for more stellar programming here at KGCS. I have been your host, Kevin Eckberg. Good night.